Welcome to a new episode of Retracing History here on Readout Productions. And yes, I've cracked out the don't give up the ship flag again. Why? And why am I flying it on land and not on the water? Well, in this edition of Retracing History, we're going to explore Fort Meigs, located near Perrysburg, Ohio. This fort, constructed in early 1813, was the front line of the War of 1812. An American army commanded by General William Henry Harrison held out here against the British during not one, but two sieges. And the reason all this is happening is because the British are trying to threaten U.S. shipbuilding operations in Erie, Pennsylvania. Harrison must hold on and block the British long enough for Oliver Hazard Perry to launch his ships in the water and come out here and fight the big battle for Lake Erie. So this is all part of our coverage on Lake Erie during the War of 1812. I'll say it before, and I'll say it again. The United States declaration of war against Great Britain in June of 1812 was a very bad idea. Yes, the British had the majority of their armed forces tangled up with handling Napoleon Bonaparte's France, but even with limited elements of the regular army, augmented with Canadian fencibles, militia, and indigenous allies, the British in North America greatly outmatched the U.S. armies in the first few battles. Senior leadership in the United States Armed Forces was just that, old. Whereas the Revolutionary War was a war of attrition for independence, the federal government envisioned this new war with Britain to be an offensive one into British Canada. But in addition to a small army and the trust of generals, sometimes called grannies by their men, there was another problem. See, the United States was already involved with another war at this point. From the time the first Europeans settled North America, war was perpetual between native tribes and colonists. By the early 19th century, that seemingly endless struggle had been pushed into the present-day Midwest of the United States. Although General Anthony Wayne and chiefs like Little Turtle of the Miami and Blue Jacket of the Shawnee brokered peace along a zigzagging line from Lake Erie to the Ohio River, it was never going to hold back American settlers. The establishment of the Indiana Territory reignited tensions as its governor, William Henry Harrison, rapidly acquired native land using whatever tactics necessary to boost his territory's population to the quota that would allow it to achieve statehood. The whole matter deserves a video unto itself, but because of these actions, Harrison became popular amongst the settlers of the Old Northwest and despised by the Shawnee chief known as Tecumseh. Tecumseh was just as charismatic of a leader as Harrison. With the aid of the religious teachings of his brother Tenskwatawa, Tecumseh was able to organize a confederacy of natives vehemently opposed to the influence of United States culture. Tecumseh and Harrison came to verbal blows in 1810, and shots were formally fired in 1811 when Harrison marched on Tenskwatawa's village of Prophetstown. The Battle of Tippecanoe, as it came to be known, made Harrison the most famous Indian fighter in the States at that time. It also led Tecumseh into negotiating an alliance with the British Empire, which would terrorize the bygone commanders of the U.S. Army in the opening battles of the War of 1812. In a matter of weeks, 3 of the United States' most prominent forts upon the upper Great Lakes had been lost. Michigan Territory was essentially in British control alongside Tecumseh's Confederacy. Following the surrender of Fort Detroit, a new commander of the United States Army of the Northwest was needed. William Henry Harrison had wanted the job from the moment war was declared. When he did not receive it, he became a militia general in Kentucky instead. After being passed up a second time for another Rev War veteran, Harrison was finally commissioned as a major general and given overall command in September 1812. However, Brigadier General James Winchester, the man who was briefly in charge of the Army before Harrison, would plunge the Army of the Northwest into a second disaster. Wanting to regain Fort Detroit and the whole of Michigan Territory as quickly as possible, Harrison attempted a winter campaign. Lake Erie would be frozen over, thereby giving portions of the U.S. Army a quick route to march over. But before Harrison could link up with Winchester, the latter received pleas from the village of Frenchtown to liberate it from British occupation. Although initially successful, Winchester did not properly secure the village's defenses. On January 22, 1813, British General Proctor attacked. Winchester was captured and forced to surrender. But the real carnage ensued the following day, when some of the native warriors that had been participating in the battle commenced to kill and apprehend Winchester's wounded that were too badly incapacitated to be taken by General Proctor. Between the battle and massacre, only about 30 of nearly 1,000 U.S. soldiers and militia that went with Winchester managed to link back up with Garrison. With the full force of winter now bearing down on the remnants of the Army of the Northwest, it was needed to fortify their encampment on the fringes of the state of Ohio along the south bank of the Maumee River. Garrison would name this new fort after Ohio's governor, Return J. Meigs, Jr.
So we just walked into a blockhouse. There's 7 blockhouses that make up Fort Meigs. 7 blockhouses, 5 cannon batteries on 10 acres. Big fort. Big fort. And to quote a certain line crosser, we just be building stuff. That was the censored version. In any case, I come inside here, it gives you a better idea of what it was like to build Fort Meigs. Garrison picked possibly the most difficult time of year if you want to build something. And there is a reason he's not being cruel to his men. It is out of necessity. He begins construction in February of 1813. This is in the aftermath of the River Raisin massacre. The left wing of his Army of the Northwest is completely shattered, and he needs to make sure his men are protected for the rest of the winter from another potential winter campaign. Both sides tried a lot of ambitious winter campaigns during the War of 1812. That's partly because you have native warriors on the side of the British, and you got militiamen back in the United States that are somewhat used to campaigning in the winter, or they think it sounds like a great idea until they actually try to do it. So he's going to fortify on the south bank of the Maumee River, near present-day Perrysburg, Ohio, to build this fortified camp. And really, just imagine, I mean, you're dealing with the ground is stiff and frozen. If it does heat up a bit, then all the ice is going to melt, snow's going to melt, and you're going to be just knee-high in mud. There are no barracks at Fort Meigs, at least not in its initial phase of construction. Everybody's in tents, so you're just sleeping in the mud. It is not fun. I'm getting flashbacks to our Valley Forge trip. It was not fun for these guys building Fort Meigs, but it had to be done in order to ensure that the British would not have an easy breakout into Ohio and threaten not just the state of Ohio, but U.S. Navy shipbuilding activities happening in Erie, Pennsylvania. Wow, actual protection.
I know, and like, look at this. This is actually like, granted, there would have been a wood step here, I'm sure, to get everybody up to the right height, but like, this is an actual firing position.
The logs were usually about 15 feet long, staked about 3 feet down to the ground, and then they would mound the dirt up. What'd you say, a good 6-7 feet were up?
Yeah, I'd say.
It's huge.
Because I'm 5'9"-ish, and it's probably another foot above my head.
Look for the embrasure there, or loophole in this case. We're dealing with infantry. Fire out, and if you step down, you are more than protected.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, you'd probably be perfectly safe reloading up here behind one of these. Yeah, this is a right proper firing step. This is nice.
Wood knew what he was doing when he engineered this fort.
We've been to a lot of frontier forts. This is probably the best firing step that we've seen out of any of them.
All right, so there's 7 blockhouses that are on some of the angles of the stockade wall. And you may be thinking, well, that must be where they're living. No, not where they're living. Inside each of these blockhouses, especially during the first siege of Fort Meigs, you would have found an artillery piece at the bottom. And this is what you would call your classical garrison piece. They're not very easy to transport overland, but if you wanted to use it at a fixed post like Fort Meigs, very useful. And it would take probably a team of 6 men to operate one artillery piece. And you'll notice we've got an embrasure here pointing out toward, I think we're looking toward the west. I will say it's a little disorienting being inside the fort because it's not straight lines. It's like almost an ellipse. Got your accoutrements up here to fire the gun. We got our sponge to wet out any sparks from the previous firing. The iron worm, this will pull out any debris from the previous firing. And I'm going to be quite honest, I don't know what this one is for. maybe another variant of the Iron Worm. That I'm not used to, but on the back, you'll have your ramrod to ram the charge down, your projectile, and the actual package of ammunition. You can see in here, we got ammunition boxes. Then upstairs, well, that's where you'd have had some, I believe we'd had some loopholes, yep. Go up to the top of the blockhouse. And you've had a number of soldiers guarding the artillery position down below. And your infantrymen are now well guarded, firing out of these loopholes out at an enemy force. And during the siege of Fort Meigs, the first siege, of course, if we're looking to the west, we would have had a line of Tecumseh's native warriors firing toward us, some British soldiers probably supporting that way. We're now looking more toward the north, and that's, of course, looking across the Maumee River where the main British battery was firing upon us. Imagine the danger of being in here. I mean, you're pretty safe against small arms fire, but you got to deal with that big British artillery battery, and then eventually you have the second battery on the east side of the fort beginning on May 3rd. I would not want to be in here if one of those found their mark.
No. Definitely not. A lot of shrapnel.
Yeah, so this is great for defense against small arms fire, but now you're entering an artillery duel. So that's an interesting look into some of the defenses here at Fort Meigs, how they were being used. Here's a nice image showing you some U.S. regulars up here in the top holding out against an attacking force. We're in another blockhouse here, and they got a display about life of the soldier and the officer. As I mentioned, Fort Meigs is a fortified camp. No barracks, everybody's in tents. See little displays in there of the uniform of a standard soldier of the U.S. regular Army in 1813. Of course, they got the shotguns at this time, because we really did have the best strip during the War of 1812.
Yeah, it was pretty fire.
Yeah, practicality, but it looked awesome.
It looked awesome. That was the
looked incredible. I'm going to assume we're playing the rule of thumb of it's probably about 4 to 6 men a tent.
Yeah, that's what
that was standard during the Revolution. It's standard during the American Civil War. I don't see why it changed. Small A-frame tent like that. Yep, talks about in here, stuff that, this actually shows you a list of the personal effects of Archibald G. Woodridge, who was with the 2nd Artillery, killed here at Fort Meigs, showing what he had at the time of his death: knapsack, frock, shirt, trousers, pantaloons, shoes, coat, stockings, hat, common hat with a silver eagle, pocketbook, blanket, $18.75 cash. Wow.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, he was carrying a lot on him. And then we move over here to your higher ranking officers. It actually shows another listing of the personal effects. This is for Captain Ashbull, I think that's Nearing?
Yeah, it looks like Nearing.
Nearing. It was with the 19th U.S. Infantry. Had a full dress coat, silk sash, hat, coat, flannel coat, riding whip, nutmeg, silver watch, towel, vest, boots, socks, soapbox, writing desk, Smith's infantry rules, articles of war, silver corded tassel. You get the idea. They have a lot more stuff.
Well, I think it's interesting. His $18.75 in cash. Apparently, for a corporal, the monthly pay at the time was $10.
$10.
So he had almost 2 months' pay on him.
Wow.
Which is a lot of money.
And then when you go inside here, every soldier at Fort Meigs, from General Garrison to the youngest private, lived in a tent. Most slept 6 men a tent. Okay, that rule of thumb is still true in the War of 1812, which left little room for personal effects. But officers, they got a large tent, like this marquee that's set up here. And we'll step inside. This looks like a marquee that would have been shared maybe by junior officers potentially, because we got multiple beds here, 2 beds. It's kind of hard to see with the glass. There we got some of their uniforms and personal effects displayed. Of course, we got the baggage here. There's a technical term for the box that is failing to escape me at the moment. I'm sure somebody can tell me in the comment section. An officer's baggage box. But anyways, give all of your eating utensils up there. Writing desk, as they mentions in here. So yeah, much better living conditions. But you know what they're sharing? Being in the freezing cold or the hot sun.
Yes.
Yeah.
The weather itself does not change.
No. I love this. I mean, I don't love getting any of this.
This is great, though. I love
This is some dark humor for an exhibit.
the Wheel of Fate.
The Wheel of Fate, there was a lot of things that could take out the American garrison here at Fort Meigs. Oh boy, I'm wondering what I'll end up with. See me, I'm part of the Pennsylvania militia. So let's see what's gonna happen to PA militia boy.
Infectious arthritis.
So close to one that I can actually talk about with some dignity.
Swollen and stiff joints, severe pain, chills, and fever.
You know that one episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender when they try to decide Aang's punishment? And
Yeah.
they're like, please be community service. Please
Yes.
be community service. Yay! Boiling vat of hot water. All right, we got another PA militia men here.
Oh boy, I really hope that it's typhus. I got the bloody flux.
Wah, wah.
I had a coworker suffering from that recently.
Oh, I will make fun then.
No, well, he's fine now. Modern medicine's a hell of a drug.
Yeah, it really is, because that was your leading cause of death, usually in the military. Dysentery.
Yeah, and funnily enough, pretty much everything on this list with modern medicine, completely treatable. Yeah.
So, as the U.S. Army and the militiamen with them begin building Fort Meigs, they're going to attract quite the attention. Settlers that are in the surrounding area, Native Americans that were still living in the region, they're going to start coming out and really questioning what Harrison's up to. And they're going to start asking some very peculiar questions. Almost as if some of them were spies sent by the British. Yeah, so Harrison caught on pretty quickly that he was going to have an issue with spies trying to scope out what his defenses would be like at Fort Meigs. These spies were probably providing information to General Proctor for the forthcoming siege. And while he had spies in his own ranks, not just people from the outside the walls, but also within the walls, men within the fort that were very disgruntled with the poor living conditions in here, the high mud, they were starting to think about maybe they wanted to flip sides at this point. And well, if you got caught spying, well, this may have been your fate.
March 31st, 1813. This day, a general court-martial sentenced John T. Mosby, a private in Captain Bradford's company, for threatening to blow up the magazine and then to desert to the British, to be confined, tied to a post or log in a tent by himself 1 month, to have a handcuff on his right hand, to ride a wooden horse for 30 minutes once a week for 1 month with a 6-pound ball fastened to each foot, to wear a ball and chain the whole time, ... It seems like it continues. Just every punishment they could throw at him, it seems like they were using.
It's a rule of thumb, don't spy.
Spying in wartime is generally not going to go well for you.
No.
Nah.
The backbone of the Army of the Northwest was the 17th and 19th U.S. Infantry Regiments. They were joined by a detachment of U.S. Dragoons and U.S. Artillery. But the majority of Harrison's muscles came in the form of militias. One of the great ironies of the War of 1812 is that the Democratic Republicans, the political party in favor of the war, were also opposed to a large standing army. While the quota for regular soldiers was increased at the start of the war, the federal government hoped all states would be willing to contribute their militias for the sake of the nation's victory. The results were mixed at best. Fortunately for Harrison, his militia support was better than most of his contemporaries during the conflict. The fort's workforce included militiamen from Ohio, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. But militias came with varying uniforms and accoutrements, examples of which can be found within the museum at Fort Meigs. I also want to note this weather vane that was once on top of the courthouse in Columbus, Ohio. It said all the holes torn through it were caused not by Mother Nature, but by militiamen who used the vane for target practice at the start of the War of 1812. Speaking of firearms, the standard gun design across the United States was the model 1795 Springfield musket. But really, that musket was the U.S. government's first copy of the old Charlesville musket, which had been imported in from France during the Revolution. By the time of Fort Meigs' construction, the U.S. government had 2 armories in operation. Additional manufacturers were contracted by state governments to produce similar muskets for their militias. Supply shortages, enlistments expiring, and personal matters drove Harrison to leave the unfinished fort in March. He entrusted the garrison to Brigadier General Joel Leftwich. It's important to note Leftwich was not a general in the regular army, but in the Virginia militia. However, he possessed military experience stretching back to the American Revolution. Now, when has anything bad ever happened to a U.S. fort when under the care of a Rev War veteran during the War of 1812? So all hell broke loose at Fort Meigs in March of 1813. The men stopped using latrines and started relieving themselves in the middle of camp. An effigy of a regimental quartermaster was raised in protest over limited rations, and portions of the fort walls were dismantled for firewood. Now, while it seems easy to point to Leftwich as a source of blame in this situation, we should be fair to consider what he was handling. The Virginia militiamen had gone unpaid since October of 1812 and knew their enlistments were due to expire in April. Leftwich forewarned Harrison he would have to resign the responsibilities he had entrusted him with when the expiration date was met. We also know Leftwich administered a handful of court-martials that handled infractions at Fort Meigs, including the previously mentioned Wood and Horse case. Only Captain Elizur Wood, the de facto engineer of Fort Meigs, left a scathing account of Leftwich and his Virginians. Other regular officers who we have journals from don't really mention anything of what Wood was describing. In any case, Fort Meigs' garrison shrunk by April of 1813. Most of the Virginians had left, even some of the Pennsylvanians. But help was on the way. A new campaign season approached, meaning militia from Ohio and Kentucky was mobilized to reinforce Fort Meigs. Harrison also was in frequent correspondence with Commodore Perry, based out of Erie, Pennsylvania. With the spring fog came the opening of the lakes. For Harrison to renew his offensive on Fort Detroit, he would need the U.S. Navy to take control of Lake Erie, thus denying General Proctor and Tecumseh the resources they needed to continue occupying the Michigan territory. Tecumseh was eager for a rematch against Harrison, and Proctor wanted the closest threat to Upper Canada neutralized. The stage was set for a major battle upon the Maumee Rapids.